The first thing people usually say when they hear my story is that fishermen spend their lives fighting the water. But that's not really true. Most of the time the river is a partner. Quiet, patient, almost forgiving. The real danger is when you forget that it can change in a heartbeat. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my life I've fished along the lower stretches of the Mekong River in Thailand. My father did it before me, and his father before him. I know the smell of that river better than I know the smell of my own home. Mud, algae, wet bamboo, diesel from the longtail boats, and that faint metallic scent that comes right before rain. When the wind moves across the water in the early morning, you can hear the reeds whispering along the banks and the occasional splash of something large surfacing somewhere in the brown depths. That morning started the way hundreds of mornings before it had started. Quiet. Warm. Slow. The sun hadn't climbed above the trees yet, and a thin layer of mist hovered just over the river's surface like smoke drifting across glass. I pushed my narrow wooden boat away from the muddy bank and let the engine idle softly. The water was calm, almost too calm, and the air was heavy with humidity. Somewhere deep in the jungle behind me, a bird called once, sharp and hollow. I remember thinking it would be a good day. Fishing along the Mekong requires patience more than strength. The river is wide, brown, and deceptive. Underneath the surface there are currents twisting like invisible ropes, sandbars that appear and vanish, and creatures most people never even imagine. Catfish the size of small motorcycles. Freshwater sharks. And the ones fishermen whisper about when the sun goes down and the beer bottles start emptying. The giant river stingray. I had never seen one up close before that day. Only stories. Old men at the dock said they could grow wider than a dinner table, with tails like whips and barbs long enough to pierce bone. They spend their lives buried in the riverbed, hidden under the silt, waiting. But stories on the river are like shadows. Half of them are exaggerations. Or at least, that's what I used to think. I steered my boat toward a deeper stretch where the current slowed. The water there turns darker, almost black. Perfect for large fish. I dropped anchor and prepared my heavy line, thick braided cord attached to a reinforced rod and a steel hook baited with chunks of fish. The river was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. That kind of silence always puts me on edge. It's the kind of silence where the jungle feels like it's watching you. I cast the line and leaned back against the edge of the boat. The wood creaked softly under my weight. A thin breeze carried the smell of wet earth from the banks. Somewhere nearby a fish broke the surface with a dull splash. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Fishing teaches you to let your mind drift. I watched the mist dissolve as the sun began to rise. The water turned from gray to brown to a muddy gold. Sweat collected on the back of my neck. Then my rod jerked. Not a small tug. A violent, sudden pull that nearly ripped the rod out of my hands. My heart kicked hard against my ribs as I grabbed it and braced my feet against the side of the boat. The line screamed as something powerful dove toward the bottom. At first I thought it was a giant catfish. That's the usual fight, long, heavy, stubborn. They pull deep and slow. But this was different. Whatever I had hooked wasn't just swimming away. It was dragging the boat. The bow shifted violently, and the anchor rope snapped tight before jerking loose from the mud. Suddenly my small boat was sliding across the water, pulled by something massive beneath the surface. My arms strained as I tried to control the rod. The line cut through the water at a steep angle, vibrating like a wire under tension. Easy. Easy. I muttered to myself. I've landed fish over 100 kilos before. The trick is patience. Let them tire themselves out. But within seconds I realized something was wrong. The pull wasn't forward anymore. It went straight down. Then the rod bent so sharply I thought it would snap. The water beside the boat erupted. For a split second I saw a shape break the surface, wide, flat, dark brown, with wings that looked like they belonged to some ancient creature from another age. A stingray. And not just any stingray. This thing was enormous. At least 2 meters across. My stomach dropped as it slammed back into the water and dove again, pulling the line straight down beneath the boat. The rod jerked violently from my grip. Instinct made me grab the line with my hands to stop it from tangling around the propeller. That was my first mistake. The force on the line suddenly surged. Before I could react, it yanked tight around my wrist. Then the river swallowed me. The shock of the water hitting my body knocked the air from my lungs. One moment I was standing in the boat, the next I was plunging headfirst into the brown darkness. The Mekong isn't clear like ocean water. You can't see more than a few inches. Everything around me turned into swirling mud and bubbles as the current spun my body. The line was still wrapped around my arm. And the stingray was still diving. I felt myself being dragged deeper. Panic exploded inside my chest. I tried to kick upward, but the pull was relentless. The pressure in my ears grew painful as I sank further beneath the surface. Somewhere ahead of me I felt the massive movement of the animal. Not saw. Felt. A huge shape stirring the water like a living wall. My lungs were already screaming for air. In that moment one terrifying thought hit me harder than the cold water. If the stingray turned. If that tail came near me. The barb could go straight through my chest. I twisted desperately, trying to free my arm from the line, but it had tightened under the strain. My fingers fumbled along the cord as my vision began to blur. My chest burned. My heartbeat pounded in my skull. Then suddenly the pull stopped. For one brief second everything went still. And I felt the creature beneath me shift. That was when instinct took over. I grabbed the knife strapped to my belt and slashed at the line. The blade cut halfway through before the ray surged again. The force spun my body sideways and slammed me against something solid. The riverbed. Mud exploded around me as the massive animal tried to bury itself in the silt, a natural defense stingrays use to anchor themselves. My knife sliced through the rest of the line. Instantly the tension vanished. I kicked upward with everything I had left. The surface felt impossibly far away. My lungs burned like they were on fire. My arms felt heavy and numb. Then suddenly my head broke through the water. I dragged in the biggest breath of air I have ever taken in my life. For a moment I could only float there, coughing and gasping while the current pushed me slowly downstream. My boat drifted a few meters away, rocking gently like nothing had happened. But below me, something moved. A huge dark shadow glided beneath the surface before disappearing into the muddy depths. The giant stingray was gone. I hauled myself back into the boat with shaking arms. My wrist was raw where the line had tightened around it, and my chest still heaved with every breath. I sat there for a long time, staring at the water. The river looked exactly the same as it had before. Quiet. Calm. Harmless. But now I knew what lived beneath it. That day taught me something every fisherman should remember. The wild doesn't hate you. It doesn't even know you exist. But it is always stronger than you. And the moment you forget that, that's when the river decides to remind you.